To inject a disease agent into the body seems crazy. It just violates our intuitions. Now, those of us who trust the medical establishment know, well, I know it seems crazy to inject a dead form of the virus into me to prevent me from getting sick, but I trust what the doctors say, so I will do it. Now, if you don't trust what the doctors say, if you're alienated from the medical, scientific, political establishment, you'll fall back on your intuitions. My name is Steve Pinker. I am a cognitive psychologist, which means I'm interested in the human mind. I'm interested in pretty much all aspects of language and mind and human nature. As soon as you ask the question of why does rationality matter, you've kind of already answered it because you're waiting for a rational explanation. As long as you're seeking reasons for anything, as opposed to bribing someone to say some words or threatening them to say some words, as long as as soon as you ask the question, why, what is the reason, you've already accepted rationality. So rationality is a very strange value. We have all agreed to it as soon as we start to think about anything. But perfecting your rationality, that is trying to avoid biases and fallacies and prejudices, is important in a number of ways. It leads to better outcomes in life. People who are more rational are less likely to be in accidents, less likely to waste money, less likely to lose their job, get into arguments. Societies, by applying rationality, make progress. We live longer, our children are less likely to die, fewer of us are in poverty, fewer of us get killed in wars, more of us can read and write and travel. How did this happen? Not because there is some mystical, mysterious force called progress, but because people apply their rationality. When you try to solve some problem like disease or war or crime, sometimes we succeed, and if we remember the solutions that work, if we try not to repeat our mistakes, then progress can happen. And that is the application of rationality. And finally, rationality is, I argue, not just important for material progress, but also for moral progress. That the great moral movements in human history, like the abolition of torture and absolute monarchy and slavery and the oppression of women and of gay people, they often began with an argument. Some philosopher or writer pointed out to people in their day that some practice that they carried out was inconsistent with values that they claimed to hold. And that would often get a movement started. And it is, I argue, the basis on which we should decide which movements we should support today. The difference between a mob and a movement for social justice is, do they have good arguments on their side? Well, one of the most common fallacies is confusing correlation with causation. And the example that I use to start off the chapter is the dictator for life of Turkmenistan, Niyazov, who told his people they should all chew bones to have stronger teeth, because dogs chew bones, dogs have good teeth, therefore chewing bones makes your teeth strong. Only if you have strong teeth to begin with can you chew bones, and so the causation is reversed. Not chewing bones makes your teeth strong, but having strong teeth allows you to chew bones. And much of the health advice that turns out to be bogus comes from confusing correlation from causation. And it's often very difficult because many things go together. There are people who exercise a lot, and they don't smoke, and they eat healthy diets, and they might be healthy to begin with, so you exercise if you have lots of energy. How can you tell which one actually makes you healthy? It's not so easy. The main technique is the randomized controlled trial. You divide people into two groups, and you impose on one group the possible cause, the other group is the control, and then you see what happens. If you don't do something like that, you really don't know what causes what. And it's a major cognitive tool in trying to make sense of our world. It's important that we be aware of our own fallacies so that we can try to avoid them, that we don't get distracted, for example, by the availability bias. That is the habit that we have of judging probability and risk and danger by whether we can think of an example from the news, from rumors. And so people think that they're in grave danger of being killed by a terrorist, whereas the chance is smaller than drowning in a bathtub or dying from the sting of a bee. But countries have gone to war to prevent terrorism, thinking that it is a huge risk, whereas it's a very small risk. We have the conjunction fallacy, where we think that a vivid scenario that we can play out in our imagination is more probable than a generic class of events. So people think that it's more likely that the United States and China will fight a war after China tries to take over Taiwan than there'll be a war. Now, that's impossible. That's a logical fallacy. You can't have the probability of A and B and C being greater than the probability of A, but it's one of the biases that we are victims of, and if we can remember that bias, then we can make sure we don't fall for it. One of the most pervasive fallacies is inability to really grasp chance, randomness. We confuse a random process, one that has no laws, no reason, no orderliness, with a random pattern. We don't realize that even if the cause of something is unpredictable or random, it can often lead to illusory clusters, things happening many times in a row just by chance. So for example, if you keep flipping a coin, sometimes there'll be 6 heads in a row, not because the coin is biased, but there's nothing to prevent it. It's not as if the coin is trying to look random, like, oh, I've landed on heads 5 times in a row. I better try to land on my tails this time. That doesn't happen. But we act as if it happens, as if random processes try to look random. The gambler's fallacy is an example of that. If the roulette wheel lands on red 6 times in a row, people think it's due for a black, and they're more likely to put money on black. And that is a fallacy. Or another example, what I call the cluster illusion. When events are completely random in time, it sounds as if they're in bursts. I know this because when I was a student in a lab in auditory perception, we had a computer that played tones completely at random. So the person had the headphones, they were in a room, they have to press a button when they hear a sound, tones were at random. And people they knew this, but then they would come out of the room and say, those tones aren't random, it sounds like this. Beep, 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 beep. They come in clusters. But that's what randomness sounds like. As long as there's not a process that tries to space events apart, sometimes they'll occur in clusters. And that can lead to fallacies as we interpret our lives, because sometimes bad things will all happen at once. Not for any reason, but just because when things are at random, they will tend to fall into what our eyes see as clusters. So people might think the apocalypse is coming, we are being punished for our sins, bad things happen in threes, there are no coincidences, because we don't have a good sense of what a coincidence looks like. One of the things I try to do in rationality is to explain some of the major tools of reasoning, some theorems and formulas and laws that are important to get outside our biases to see things objectively. And an example is the rule from the Reverend Thomas Bayes, Bayes' rule or Bayes' theorem. Sounds very scary and mathematical, but it's actually it can be made very intuitive. And this is the rule that governs how much we should believe something based on the strength of evidence. And it's actually very simple. If you consider your belief to be not, I believe it, I don't believe it, but a range from 0, impossible, to 1, certain, but most of our beliefs are in between, how should we move our beliefs up and down depending on the evidence that comes in? The rule is simple. You just take three concepts. One is the prior. How plausible, how likely, how common is the idea before you even look at the evidence? The likelihood. If it is true, what is the chance that you will see the evidence? So in the case of, say, a medical test, it is the sensitivity. That is, if you have the disease, how often will the test come out positive? And then you multiply those two, and you divide by how common is the data across the board. whether the idea is true or false, how likely are you to see those results? So that's Bayes' rule, not that complicated. But if you, and I think intuitively we all understand it, but if you present just numbers out of the blue, then people have a lot of trouble consciously applying Bayes' rule. So just a famous example, it's called the medical diagnosis problem. So let's say there's a form of cancer. Let's say its prevalence in the population is 1%. Let's say the sensitivity of a test for the cancer is 90%. That is, if you have cancer, 90% of the time you get a positive. But let's say that there's also a false positive rate. 9% of the time, even if you're healthy, the test says you have cancer. Okay, so those are three numbers. Now I ask, you go into the doctor's office, you take the test is positive. Do you have cancer? People say, and doctors say, 90% chance you have cancer. Wrong. It's a 9% chance. That's a big difference. Why only 9%? Well, if only 1% of people have it, the prior or the base rate, if there's a false positive rate, 9%, what it means is that most of the positives are false positives. Now, that's very hard for people to grasp unless they apply Bayes' rule. Even doctors make the error. Many people can be terrified that they have a disease, even though they're perfectly healthy. Now, it's not as if we are permanently victims of this phenomenon called base rate neglect, that is, failure to account for priors, because you can present the same problem in a way that is much more intuitive. If instead of saying the prevalence is 1%, I say, imagine 1,000 people. 10 of them have the cancer. 9 out of those 10 will get a positive test. Now there are 990 other people who are healthy. Of those, 89 people will test positive. We have 89 healthy people who test positive. We have 9 people who are sick and test positive. If you test positive, how many of those have the disease? Well, people say, well, 9 out of 89, 10%. They get the answer right. So if you just change the way you present the problem so that it fits better with our natural way of thinking, in this case of actual frequencies, of actually people that we can imagine instead of abstract probability, what is the chance that you have cancer, then people can get the right answer. One of the mysteries that I had to try to explain when writing Rationality is how people can believe such crazy things. Like many Americans believe that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of a Washington pizzeria, or that there's a whole conspiracy in Hollywood and in the government to eat children after sexually abusing them. And a lot of Americans believe this, and people all over the world believe different conspiracy theories, such as that the contrails from jet airplanes in the sky are really mind-altering drugs dispersed by a secret government program, or that 9/11 was a controlled implosion that the CIA planned in order to justify the invasion of Iraq. Now, the people who believe these things often are not crazy in the rest of their lives. They hold jobs, they bring up children, they have a house, they have a car, they follow the laws of cause and effect. And I came to realize, following a suggestion by the French cognitive psychologist Hugo Mercier, that there are different kinds of belief. There's some beliefs that we really want to know whether they are factually true or false. We have to. Is there enough gasoline in the car to get me to work? Do the children, have they had breakfast? What time do they have to get to school? You have no choice. You really have to follow reality to be a functioning person. But there are other beliefs where it kind of doesn't matter what you believe in terms of your own life. You know, did Hillary Clinton run a child sex ring? What difference does it make to my life? I think people don't care whether they are literally true or false, but they are expressions of their values, of the political and religious and moral coalition that they belong to, their clique, their tribe, their sect. So to say Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring, it's really just saying, boo, Hillary. Hillary is so depraved, so evil, that it's the kind of thing that she could do. You know, did she do it? Well, I don't know. You don't know. Maybe she did it. And some of us wonder, well, wait, no, you can't do that. You can't say something is a fact unless it really is a fact. That's not the way the human mind works. We often have many of our beliefs are expression of our values, not commitments to what is true or false. Well, the COVID pandemic really reminds us that we should worry about the pandemic of irrationality. Two pandemics: pandemic of coronavirus, pandemic of irrationality. Because, of course, when the pandemic originated, there was the nonsense from Donald Trump that it will go away by magic, that it's a plot by the Democratic Party to sabotage his chances of re-election, that it can be cured by anti-parasite cream, that the vaccines are really a plot to implant microchips into our bloodstream by Bill Gates to control the population, that it came from 5G microwave towers. And it can have consequences because the Delta variant, which has led to a resurgence of the pandemic in many countries, has often come because of people refusing to be vaccinated. We need to understand why people don't accept the scientific consensus. And part of it is we should have to remember it's not just now. People have always had these intuitions. Resistance to vaccination is as old as vaccination. In every period there are people who refuse vaccines because it is very unintuitive. When you think about it, we have a sense of health from pure essence, pure substance inside us. That's why, as Mercier has shown, many cultures have invented bloodletting as a cure for disease independently, just because it fits the intuition. Disease comes from some contaminant, some pollutant, some toxin, and to cure disease, you've got to get the toxin out of the body by sweating, by bloodletting, by vomiting, by laxatives. And culture after culture rediscovers these false cures. By the same token, to inject a disease agent into the body seems crazy. It just violates our intuitions. Now, those of us who trust the medical establishment know, well, I know it seems crazy to inject a dead form of the virus into me to prevent me from getting sick, but I trust what the doctors say, so I will do it. Now, if you don't trust what the doctors say, if you're alienated from the medical, scientific, political establishment, you'll fall back on your intuitions. Many people in the United States now are doing it because somehow vaccines got associated with liberals, with the left, with the government. But there are also people who resist it who are on the left because it's not holistic, it's big pharma, corporations want to sell you the vaccine, so there's paranoia on the left as well. Well, certainly social media deserve part of the blame for the viral spread of misinformation and fake news and conspiracy theories, because we know just from human history, most people's beliefs are false, at least beliefs about big issues like disease and history and politics. The only way we can filter out all of the false beliefs and just isolate the true beliefs is if we have slow evaluation of claims, if we have editing and fact-checking and free speech and criticism. Social media have none of those. It's not like a newspaper, it's not even like Wikipedia, where one person can correct another person's mistakes and everyone is committed to objective truth. With social media, the only thing that counts is, are there shares? Are there likes? Does it go viral? And so it brings out the most irrational in us. But it's not just social media, because before social media and independent of social media, there are many other channels by which we spread misinformation. Rumors, urban legends, something happened to a friend of my friend, supermarket tabloids, and even other media, like in the United States at least, talk radio and cable network news like Fox News. So it's not just social media, just the human condition that we like to believe things that are interesting, that make our side look good, make the other side look evil. That's just the way the human mind works. What's special is the institutions that filter out all of that nonsense and that allow the small examples of truth to come out. I do think that rationality, the tools of rationality, should have a bigger role in our educational curricula, that the students very early on should know about probability and logic and correlation and causation. We should know about our own cognitive biases, like reasoning from anecdote, like arguing from authority, like arguing ad hominem, that is attacking the person instead of the position. And just so that if we know them, at least there's some chance that we can discount them to try to overcome them. It should be part of our everyday argument, conversation, discourse, editorials, newspaper commentary. People should know that it's bad to attack a straw man, bad to reason from one viral video or one anecdote. And we should strengthen the institutions like responsible journalism, like science, like freedom of the press, free speech, all of the rules and norms that we have implemented to try to overcome human irrationality. Because none of us, we're all a little irrational. There's no such thing as a rational person. What we hope is that there are rational institutions that can try to circumvent or repress each individual's rationality so the whole group can be more rational. This is, again, a message that Hugo Mercier emphasizes, that often some of these fallacies that 90% of people commit them, but if you put people in groups and they all are trying to find the truth, and if one person has an error, the other person can point it out. If one person has the correct answer, they can explain it. Then instead of 90% of people getting it wrong, 70 to 80% of people get it right. Sometimes it's not possible to change their mind. It's like, you know, could you convince the Pope that Jesus Christ never existed? Probably not. You might be right, but some people, they will go to their graves believing things, especially when a belief is central to their identity as a moral person. This is a belief that defines who I am. Then you probably can't convince them. But not everyone is like that. There's a whole range of belief, from the true believers to people who maybe I believe it, maybe I don't, and they can be persuaded. You can ask questions. Well, how do you know? Why should we believe it? Is this really consistent with everything else that we believe? Is your source for that belief someone with a good track record of correct predictions in the past, compared to mainstream science, mainstream journalism? And so the people with intermediate degrees of belief, some of them can be persuaded. And of course, there are new babies being born every day, and they aren't born believing in QAnon or chemtrails, and one could try to prevent them from getting sucked into the conspiracy in the first place. I'm probably not the person to ask, because we all think we're rational, and we even have a bias, namely, we think everyone else is biased, but not me. So I don't know, but I do try to identify my irrationalities. And I know that one of them is I get to the airport exactly on time to make the plane. Just like 10 seconds and I'm on the plane. Now that's irrational, because if I have a little bit more time at home than the airport, that can't outweigh the pain, the expense, the inconvenience of missing a flight. But I'm kind of crazy. I do that. I have a fear of being early.